I want to begin today by wishing everyone a happy Mother's Day. This is a picture of my mother. Dorothy Banks was her maiden name, Dorothy Meyer, after she married my father. She was about 23 in this picture, shortly before her and my father got engaged. Also want to show you a picture of Steve's mom, Betty Herrera, or Betty Alvarado, when she married Steve's dad. I want to wish everybody out there a happy Mother's Day on this fifth Sunday of Easter. And as we celebrate the fifth Sunday of Easter, it's important to remember that we're in the middle of the Easter season now. And in the middle of the Easter season, we've moved away from the resurrection appearances of Jesus to talking about the ways in which the resurrected Jesus is in our midst. Last week, the image was of Jesus as the shepherd or the sheep gate. Today, the image is not so much of a physical image as it is a spiritual image or an emotional image, if you will. The questions come in the middle of the Last Supper. Where are you going? What's going on? The disciples are asking, what's happening? As if they didn't really know. They've been with Jesus for several years now, and he's talked about his impending suffering and crucifixion and death and eventual resurrection. You would think the disciples would have gotten it by now. All the signs were there. And yet, as they come to the Last Supper, in John's Gospel at least, the Last Supper discourse, as John tells it, is the way in which the resurrected Jesus, even though he's not resurrected yet, instructs his disciples and ultimately is instructing the community of faith of how they are to live now as a resurrected community. And so in the midst of that supper, Jesus says, one of you is about to betray me. And they all begin to turn to one another. If you remember that famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci of the Last Supper, shortly after Jesus has made this announcement, they all fall back in dismay and horror. What? One of us? Who? And Jesus says, yes, this is true because I'm going to leave you very soon. I'm going to suffer and die, and I'm going to be leaving you. And they go, what are we to do? How are we going to survive once you leave us? And of course, that's the whole point of the Easter season in reference to those who have been newly baptized. What do we do now? How do we live this life? How do we walk the path that you've been walking, Jesus? How do we become agents and instruments of the reign of God? Now, I know not all of that is in the text of John's Gospel, but that's all behind it, all behind their question. And Jesus says, you know where I'm going. And they, again, respond in disbelief. I don't know. We don't know. And Jesus says that iconic phrase, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Those are three very powerful words, the way, the truth, and the life. I'm not going to spend time talking about the individual words, but the sense is that Jesus says, I've given you the direction you need to go. I've given you the foundation that you use as you go along this path. And in that is life. That's what resurrected life is about. I've been thinking a lot about it as we've gone through these last weeks of the coronavirus and wondering if maybe it's been good for us to do some reevaluation on what's really important and what is really of value to us. I look at the pictures of Steve's mom and my mom and our families, and I'm sure many of you have family pictures of sons and daughters and grandchildren and ancestors before us. It all speaks about life. Life that is connected, life that is hopeful. It wasn't always easy for any of our ancestors. I know it wasn't easy for my mother or Steve's mom to go through the Depression and through the war. But they did. They did. They knew what life was about. They knew what was of value to them, the relationships that they had with their families. I think that's what Mother's Day reminds us about, is relationships, not only with our mothers, but with everyone in the community. And the challenge that Jesus is giving to the disciples is how to make those relationships not be a drain, not be a drag, not to sap the energy or take the life away, but how to enable those relationships that we have with one another as members of the resurrected community of Jesus, how to make those relationships bring us life, sustain us through the hard times. How do we enable and empower one another in relationships so that we become a community that thrives and not just survives? One of my nurses said that in terms of the shalom of God, the well-being of God, that it's about thriving and nurturing and strengthening and walking together as people of hope, as people of faith. It's not always easy to see that, and on my bad days, I don't think of that at all. On my good days, I try to remember it as much as possible. Later in the gospel story, Jesus says to his disciples, "You are the ones now who will take this message into the world. You will be the ones to take the message into the world." Often think about the phrase, take the message, as if it means preaching the gospel, taking the Bible out and standing on a street corner telling people what the gospel, what the Bible says. I don't think that that's what it means at all. To take the message out into the world means to live it, to live it. To let my phrase that I've always used in terms of Exodus, to let the slow to anger, rich in mercy, steadfast in love, abounding in kindness, God, show through us in our actions, in our lives, in the choices and decisions that we make. I think if we look back to our mothers, that's the example that they gave us. To thrive by making choices and decisions that empower us, that enable us, that motivate us to be more godlike, if you will, to let the godness, the divine life in us show through in the world. There's a lot of healing that's going to need to be done, and a lot of healing that needs to be taken place as we go forward. A lot of healing physically, emotionally, even a lot of healing spiritually for us. I think of how then, as we come through this Easter season and begin to even have conversations about how we're going to open our churches, if we will open our churches, maybe that's the foundational question for all of us. Not just in terms of our larger communities. What's going to enable us to thrive, to flourish, to grow stronger in life together, and to grow stronger in our faith together? That's the questions. I just leave with questions. I had a professor, Walter Brueggemann. He said, what if, in trying to respond to a question, we'd start the question and then, as if you could hear ... In other words, each response is going to have to be us. Each of us has to make this response. But let us be open as we will begin to see. Let us be open to the Spirit that will open up new horizons of the reign of God to us, empowering us, enabling us, motivating us to be instruments of the reign of God. Have a great day. Many blessings to you. I do want to call your attention to Georgia Ames. Please keep her in your prayers. She is really struggling in health. And I also want to call attention to Fred Cerruti's granddaughter, Brittany. She has been tested positive. Remember, she's the critical care nurse in California. She's been tested positive for COVID-19. So we want to pray for her. Pray for her family. Pray for all of the doctors and nurses out there and first responders, wherever they may be. Again, please stay healthy, stay safe. God's blessings be with you this day.